Is now a good time to buy property? Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.heise here, and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. I have my morning stein of coffee, and I thought we'd have a look at this article from ABC News where they speak to several property experts and ask them if, well, now's the time to buy property. A few things we need to consider, everyone. Property, well, I'd say number one, our wage growth has been not very good. Underwhelming, shall we say, since, well, 2011. While our property prices, and I will just bring up this one here, has increased significantly. Significantly. So when property prices grow tremendously, but wage growth kind of stagnates, the affordability of our property gets thrown out the window. So a lot of people are hoping that property will become slightly more reasonable. The banks are warning us of a potential up to 30% decline. They're saying 10% is more likely in the short to medium term. And all the while, our economy is in a lockdown. International tourism is taking a hit. Their trade's spat. So essentially, there's a lot of uncertainty. Now, I've been reading a lot of articles from the property bulls. You know, real estate agents, people who are, well, they've got a vested interest in that industry. And this is one thing I've started to learn the more I've been looking at all this economic news and information, or the spookers, or the people telling you their views. I mean, most of them, they've put their money where their mouth is. Their entire business, or they may have an entire, hedge fund just dedicated to this one sector. So, of course, there's going to be a bias in what they're putting forward. And, personally, I would love if property just kept going to the moon for my own personal circumstances. I honestly, yesterday I looked at, the Commonwealth Bank has this little thing where they give you a valuation of your house. And apparently my house went up, another 180 grand in a night, which is utterly insane. It makes my LVRs, according to them, look fantastic. But what's happened is some other people have probably sold in the suburb, some nicer, bigger houses, and that's bumped up the average. Because I don't believe it for a second. But maybe there's some people that do, that think those numbers that they're seeing are correct. We'll have to see, guys. We'll have to see. But, so, from a personal perspective, I think that'd be great. Yeah, wow. I'm a genius. I made all this money doing absolutely nothing, which seems a little too good to be true, because you don't really get the money until you can manage to sell it. And that's the question. If we have more and more people trying to sell in a market where, well, ability for people to access and service loans has taken a huge hit, unemployment has gone up. You look at the Roy Morgan methodology, and their unemployment, underemployment is sitting at 25% combined together. That's the number we need to worry about. What does that tell you about a portion of the population able to service potential mortgages and buy these properties off everyone at these inflated prices? And one thing we need to realize with property, and with everything, it's the edge cases of the market that set the price. So you can have people that are going, I'm never going to sell for this. I'll just sit on it. I don't need to sell. You're not important. You can just sit there and think your house is worth that and not have any buyers take it. Like the house across the road from me that's just sitting there. It's the edge cases. It's the people that are in arrears. The people where the banks foreclose on them in 6 months' time, where JobKeeper has disappeared, where they are forced to sell. That is what will shift the market. It's just the edge cases. It only takes a few. Say 40 properties in a suburb get resumed by the banks, and the banks just flip them. They're not going to hold them. What do you think that will do to the price? That's why we have everything in place to try and prop it up. So, I'm talking to friends and I'm saying, just wait a little bit. 6 months ain't going to kill you. Wait and see what happens. Wait till the R word is actually mentioned in the media. What do you think, everyone? What is your advice or suggestions that you're giving to people? We'll have to see. Because the hardest thing is catching a falling knife, isn't it? So, let's have a look at what these four experts are telling us. So with the pandemic upending house prices, 4 property experts have their say on whether you should buy. House prices are just one of the many things upended by the pandemic in Australia. Those looking to break into the housing market have been teased with predictions that property prices will drop in the foreseeable future. This doesn't automatically mean it will be easier to buy or that now is the right time to do it, but there are some good cases for taking the plunge sooner rather than later if your circumstances allow. Well, I would also argue that property, isn't it about 3 months behind the market? Remember, it's a slow-moving market. It's not like the stock exchange. It's not like crypto. It takes a while to sell houses. And yet we have organizations claiming to give a daily assessment of property values. It should just be based on what actual transactions have closed. And remember, how long does it take for a transaction to close? If you've signed up a deal, it can take weeks, months. 4 experts have weighed in on what the pandemic means for the housing market, and here's what they say. Is a breakthrough coming for first home buyers? Depending on your specific circumstances, there could be, but there's really no guarantee. CoreLogic head of research Eliza Owen says declines in property values so far have been mild, but that's not the only factor that's up for consideration. I don't think the downturn is a time to be celebrating affordability unless your income is steady and you're confident about your future earnings, she said. And that's the issue too. She's making a very good point there. There's no point in celebrating a potential decline in property or a bubble bursting if our entire economy is taking a hit. If you can't get a loan because you've lost your job. I was talking to a broker yesterday. I rang him up to get his opinion on all of this. And he was telling me he had an instance where a client had signed everything 2 days before settlement. He'd paid his deposit. He'd gone through the whole process, the whole rigmarole. 2 days before settlement, the bank rings him up and says, how are you going? You're working in a pub. What are you doing now? And he said, oh, well, I'm on JobKeeper. And the bank said, oh, well, we're not settling anymore. You're on your own. And he said, what? I'm going to lose my deposit. What am I going to do? I've got 2 days. So, of course, there were other banks that this broker managed to find for his client to help them make the deal. But it just shows you there, the banks don't care, guys. They're all about minimizing their risks. They're not our friends. Everything they're doing now is in their own self-interest. So over the next 1 to 2 years, we would expect that property prices will see a decline, probably no more than 10% nationally. Probably no more than 10% nationally. In the next 1 to 2 years. What's that based on? What's that based on, Eliza? I mean, if the edge cases are forced to sell, then we'll start seeing declines. How long can the banks go on? SQM Research founder Louis Christopher said even with detailed predictions estimating where the housing market could go next, it could impact different people in drastically different ways. And, well, that relates simply to the fact that, I'd argue, growth isn't universal. And we can see that here in this chart showing the differences in unit price growth in Sydney. Potentially, it's good for those who have the ability to buy a home, because potentially we may see more affordable housing by way of house price falls. But if we look at the reason why prices may fall, that's for bad reasons, he's saying. Well, yes, I mean, that's prices aren't coming down due to increased efficiency, massive, improvements in construction technology, new land being homesteaded and provided to people. They're coming down, well, because the bubble in property has been popped, and our economy is heading towards a recession the likes it hasn't seen in living memory for a lot of people. A lot of people don't remember the last recession. They're too young. They're too young to remember it. If I was potentially looking to buy a home right now, I would be waiting. There's a lot of uncertainty, and I don't believe the uncertainty that's out there has been priced into markets yet. So well, there you go. It just depends on your own personal financial circumstances. But Professor Stephen Rowley from Curtin University School of Economics, Finance and Property said there's no rule that prospective buyers can't make a move now rather than later. I would suggest if you are in that position with a stable job and a good income, it's probably not the worst time to go and look, he said. If you do find somewhere that you're really keen on, see if there's the potential for a deal to be done. There was a lot of demand out there before the crisis hit, and unless you've been dramatically affected, there's still a lot of people out there who are thinking about buying and probably haven't changed their minds. Well, that's true. There will be a lot of people that are in a good position to buy up. But still, these people who are out there having a look or doing the search results, which seems to be what all the property bulls are basing their hopes on, they'll take their time if they're sensible. You don't want the FOMO to get you. That's the thing. You don't want the FOMO to get you. So no shortage of factors to consider. During uncertain times, there are even more aspects to think about when making a decision on buying property. University of Adelaide Professor of Housing Research Emma Baker says recent property sales data showing prices holding steady may not have factored in huge unemployment hits caused by the pandemic shutdown. Well, we looked at another video just yesterday where discounting has increased significantly. What we've seen over the last 4 or 5 weeks has been the last hurrah of sales, she said. Well, that's a good point. How many of those sales were here's the question. Are those sales the settlements that have occurred or the negotiations? It's not sold until it's settled, isn't it? Because the banks can still pull out. So how many of those happened in a period before all of this uncertainty wasn't as manifest? If you're a young person forming a new household and you would normally get your first house, you might delay that until you know what's happening. Or you might delay it because you can't get a loan from the bank, because banks will probably get more strict on their lending. And yes, we're seeing that. We are definitely seeing that. Ms. Owens says transaction volumes, listings, and consumer sentiment index numbers have all dropped, but the new normal of low transaction activity is starting to stabilize. People are being very cautious about property right now because it's a high-cost, high-commitment purchase, and people are uncertain about their jobs, she said. The key is incomes, really. That's half of affordability, and at the moment, we're seeing pretty dramatic losses in wages paid compared to what we're seeing in property value. I would expect that property prices will continue to decline over the next few months, at least until we start to see a recovery in jobs and wages growth. Now, there's the big flashing concern there. When will we start to see a recovery in jobs, guys? People are hoping we'll get a V-shaped recovery. But will it go down, dead cat bounce? Oh, you can't see it. Down, dead cat bounce, down, then up, down, dead cat bounce, and down, down, down. And then depression. Steady boredom for a few years. Mr. Christopher has been faced with the tough task of predicting what could happen to property prices over the next few months and even years. It all rests with what's going to happen with the pandemic, and I'm not a medical expert, he says. It's extraordinarily challenging as an analyst and forecaster to really predict what's going to happen other than say, if the pandemic does this, this is what we can expect. If the pandemic does that, this is what we can expect. Well, no, really, it's got nothing to do with the pandemic, in a way. It's got everything to do with our reaction to it, with our response. Has the reaction that Australia's implemented now, the lockdown that has had economic effects, has that been reasonable or justified? Has it been an overreaction? We're never going to know. We'll never know if it's worked really well or if it hasn't. People will look at the, insane numbers overseas, but they're comparing, New York Island with a population equal to our entire civilization on a tiny island. Density and BMI probably has something to do with it. Well, we'll have to see, guys. We'll have to see. It's going to be how our government reacts. I think this slowly opening up of the economy now, if they clamp down again, consumer confidence is going to just, business confidence will plunge again, and consumer confidence will take another hit. We'll have to see. That's the big concern. He says, despite most forecasts predicting that prices will fall, there's no 100% guarantee. But doesn't property always go up? Isn't that a guarantee that everyone's saying? Right now, there's actually no bargains. Vendors are holding their ground. That's what the data is showing us. There might be bargains later in the year. We don't know, he said. Well, yes, there might be bargains if they get rid of JobKeeper, if unemployment increases, if the banks stop their holiday on allowing people to defer loans. There hasn't been a mention of that. Why wouldn't you wait? Why wouldn't you wait for that 6-month period to end and then start looking? So you get your feelers out now, look for property, say, find a few ones that you want, maybe try and see something that was an ex-Airbnb, do an Airbnb search and see, what used to be there. Keep an eye on it and just watch and see what happens. Watch and see what happens in 6 months' time. Because then people will start to feel, the gears will start to turn. Everything will tighten. I don't know. No mention of that. With all the cuts in interest rates and quantitative easing, which is effectively money printing, we may see dwelling prices rise as a result of just those two factors. Well, that's the thing. Okay. Here in Australia, a lot of the money that's created by the banks is done through the property sector because we're property addicted. We're property addicted. How much of the QE is going to go into there if you can't service those loans to help create that money? There's the issue. It's the same thing as the RBA pushing small businesses to borrow. Are the banks going to lend to these people? Who would borrow now to take that risk on? To keep your business going if you don't know it's going to be there in 6 months' time. Professor Rowley also says the impact of low population growth, a weaker rental market connected to limited overseas migration, consumer confidence, and people who were previously in a position to buy losing their jobs will all have an impact. There are an awful lot of factors which mean demand to buy housing has fallen, so that will feed through into what happens in the next few months, he said. Different areas will recover quicker. Those areas where you're traditionally strong levels of demand, good schools, and so forth. Will schools have the same impact, guys, now that we're all experienced homeschoolers? Perhaps. Perhaps. So house prices aside, rent is already on the way down. There may be no guarantee of cheap houses, but the price of rentals has already taken a hit as the result of the pandemic. Mr. Christopher said closing international borders had a huge impact on rental demand from holiday accommodation like Airbnb right through to long term. Last year we had net migration of 240,000 people, he said. Generally speaking, the first thing most of those people do is rent a property when they come to Australia. They don't buy straight away. We're not getting any of that underlying demand for rental properties right now. Newly built dwellings that are likely to increase vacancy numbers and young people waiting out the uncertainty at home are other factors influencing the rental market. Exactly. So, more and more people are going to live together or move home, find ways to save money and, slowly wait, build up a reserve. So advice to first home buyers. Everyone's circumstances are different, so there's no one-size-fits-all answer on whether now is a good time to buy a home. But our experts have shared their tips to consider if you're trying to make the big decision for yourself right now. Let's have a look at what Stephen has to say. How secure is your job? How secure is your income? If it is secure, think carefully about where it is you want to live in light of the experience over the last few months. Do your research and get out there and see what is available. Well, exactly. Do you want to live in a tiny little unit if there's the potential for another lockdown with no outdoor space? I mean, we've got quite a small backyard, actually. Our block's only, 660 square meters. But it's enough for the kids to play. We've got a garden that we're just letting go wild. I leave, there's piles of timber and things the kids can play and build things, whatever they want. So I would hate to be in this situation where you can't go to the parks, no play equipment, and you're stuck in a unit. What's Emma telling us? If I was trying to get in the housing market, in the list of priorities, number 1 is getting in. In a way, all the surrounding things are secondary, so you want to go ahead and make the best of it. So she's just saying, get in, get in, get in. Eliza, in the current environment, it's really hard to know what employment is going to look like over the next few months. I'd imagine people would want to be very confident in their finances before making such a big purchasing decision. Well, here's a suggestion. Make sure you can pay your mortgage and all your living expenses for your house on Job Seeker. What do you think about that one, guys? Have a mortgage that's very low. And Lewis is saying there's no rush. Buying your first home is a major life event. It's very difficult time for those events, and they shouldn't be timed necessarily to market conditions. Yes, take your time. And here's the disclaimer, it's general advice only. If you need individual advice, please see a professional. Yes, of course. Of course. Don't base your decisions on advice. You wouldn't base your decisions on this advice. You talk to a professional. But people base their fear and their opinions on other parts of the articles, on the FOMO we're seeing everywhere. Maybe taking time is the smartest thing, smartest advice we can take from this. So what do you think, everyone? Do you think now is the time to buy a property? Are you rushing out there, or are you waiting to look and see what's going to happen? As always, please let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and you want to support us, there are a few ways you can. You can join the channel on Patreon or YouTube. You can support us via our affiliate links at Amazon or eBay, or Independent Reserve or Kucoin. You can use Gold Pass from the Perth Mint, buy our merch from HeiseSays, or support us via PayPal. Take care, guys. Have a great weekend. I'll see you in the next video.